Well, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. I hope you had a very lovely lunch break. We are here to talk about LGBTQ teens in our libraries and what we can do to better serve them. We have with us today Nem Knight from Equality Maine, which is a fantastic organization that we're very lucky to have here in Maine. And I'm going to go ahead and turn that over to you, Nem.
Great, thanks. Hi, everybody. As Kara said, my name is Nem Knight. I work for Equality Maine. I am really excited to be talking to you all here. Before we go too much further, I do have to give you an apology. Some of my data today is very Maine specific. And the reason for that is that we recently had a study come out called the Maine Integrated Youth Health Survey that interviewed high schoolers across the state. And so I've used a lot of that data in what you're going to see today. If you are looking for data that's very specific to your state, just do a Google search for LGBTQ youth survey, and you'll get sort of a number. I just did this before, like the Office of Child and Family Services in New York has some of this. There's a Massachusetts Commission on LGBTQ youth. So this data is kind of available for your very specific state that you're located in. But hopefully you can take some of what we talk about today and kind of extrapolate it out to how it reflects within your community. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Oh, it's disappeared. Give me a second. We tested this, of course, all beforehand, and now it's not showing up. Where'd it go? My wife just changed my computer settings, and now I can't find anything. It's actually not. We're just going to share I guess you're going to have to see my whole desktop here. I'm really sorry about it. Kind of a hot mess, but here we go. All right, so this presentation is beyond the book bans. I think we're all here because we have seen some of the really ugly rhetoric that's happening right now around LGBTQ youth. We're going to talk a little bit about that and about how you, as people who work specifically with this community, can help to create more safe and inclusive spaces for them, which is sort of really more needed now than ever before. Our agenda, if anyone really wants to be counting. I also got excited about this presentation. I built in a bunch of breakout sessions. We're not going to have time for them, so we'll skip right over those. Hopefully you can stay with me. I know it's after lunch. A little bit about me. My name is Nem Knight. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I identify as a white cisgendered lesbian. This is my wife, Sam. These are our two kids. We have a tiny and a big. This is Riley up at the top, our teenager. So this subject in particular has a special place in my heart because I think that teens today are facing sort of a very specific set of challenges that I didn't face as a gay kid growing up. I come to this work actually from the world of senior care. This is me working in a senior living in May of 2020, really at the height of pandemic terror in nursing homes. And just for giggles, this is me and my homecoming date in high school. I love this picture because, like, how did we not know, either one of us, that we were gay? I also want to mention, I talked about my race at the beginning of this, and that's because when we're talking about the experiences of LGBTQ people, my experience as a white person in this community has been differently impacted than people of color. And I want to make sure that we're acknowledging that up front. That intersection is dramatic and it really changes people's experiences within the community. So I just want to acknowledge that ahead of time and a lot of the experiences that we're talking about here. So Equality Maine, really fast. I'm going to fly through this because not all of you really care about what we're doing in Maine, but we're the state's largest and oldest advocacy organization for LGBTQ folks. This comes in the form of sort of legislation that we work on, education, such as the one we're doing right now, and then community events that we host. Whoop, we just skipped right through that. We also have a program called SAGE. Many of you might have SAGE organizations within your state that provides services and advocacy for older LGBTQ folks. These are just some from our past events. And then we have a branch that focuses specifically on youth. So these are pictures from our New Leaders Project, which is a summer camp that we hold every year. with LGBTQ youth from across the state. But throughout the year, we do other advocacy as well. We work with different GSAs, we host Pride Days, we work with educators and administrators doing sort of it's really similar training to what we're going to talk about today. Generally, I would take a second to really ask what questions we want to get answered today. But like I was telling Kara, I got so excited about this presentation that I somehow got it in my head that it was an hour and 45, and it's only one just real hot hour. So I'm going to skip this for right now, and we're going to slip into the next slide. Part 1, foundations. It pays to be obvious. I like this Isaac Asimov quote because it's from Foundations. I thought maybe a room full of librarians would also appreciate it. The only thing I really want to say as we move forward is that before we can really have this conversation, I want to make sure that we're all starting from a place of shared understanding. So first, I'm going to cover some things that might feel like basics for some folks and might be totally new information for others. But I think it's important to make sure that we're all coming from a shared understanding when it comes to language and some of the terms that we're going to be using. Who is the LGBTQ community? This may seem obvious, but we are every race, religion, ethnicity, nationality, class, any other dimension of identity. You will find LGBTQ folks. Additionally, and this is sort of a tricky one, sometimes we'll skip that. It doesn't matter. I don't have time to do a discussion anyways. I wish I did. I wish I could pull all of you wonderful people into breakout rooms and talk about some things, but we're going to start with this acronym. I know it seems obvious, but I want to go through every single one of these. LGBTQ stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer. When I do this presentation in rooms of people, I ask the people within the room to tell me what different letters mean. The reason I do that is because I think it's important for us to recognize that even though we say LGBTQ all the time, when we're actually breaking out those individual words, we have different stigmas attached with them. And sometimes people are very, very hesitant to use the word lesbian or really uncomfortable saying transgender. I think it's important that we kind of examine what we bring with us in relationship to these words. This acronym is easy to toss out. All of the different words that go with it, we all kind of bring something attached to them. So just a quick breakdown before we go any further. A lesbian is a female identified person who's attracted to other female identified people. Gay is something we use sometimes as an umbrella term to imply anybody within the LGBTQ world. And sometimes it's used, especially in survey purposes or official purposes, to identify men who are attracted to other male identified people. Bisexual is somebody who's attracted to either gender. Sometimes you'll find pansexual falls under this too. Sometimes pansexual people will tell you they don't fall under this. We'll talk about that a little later. The T stands for transgender. That's somebody for whom their gender identity does not match their sex assigned at birth. And we'll talk about both of those terms in a second because they're a little tricky. And then the Q stands for queer, sometimes questioning. Queer is another word that sort of serves as an umbrella term at this point for anybody who doesn't fit within a standard definition of heterosexual or even cisgendered. We're not doing a breakout session. In some cases, when I'm pressed for time, we'll just leave definitions at the acronym because you are a group of folks who work with youth, especially. I think it's very important to do some more words because one thing that even my wife and I have noticed is that youth now are using more words and more labels to identify with. So let me give you just some basics so that you have some terminology under your belt. Non-binary is one of them. Folks who are non-binary don't identify as either exclusively male or exclusively female. These are folks who are going to use more gender neutral pronouns such as they, them. Sex assigned at birth, or sometimes you might hear like AFAB tossed around. This is the sex that is assigned to you at birth. You're born, a doctor makes a visual inspection and says, this is a girl, this is a boy. And so oftentimes sex assigned at birth is the phrase that we use, especially for folks for whom that doesn't match their gender identity. Cisgender. Cisgender is another word, or cis, that I think you'll hear a lot, especially working with youth. Cisgender is somebody, I'm a cisgendered female. So I was born, the doctor said it's a girl. I grew up and I said, yeah, that is true to my gender identity. Somebody who's cisgender is somebody for whom their sex assigned at birth aligns with their gender identity. Gender identity is another word I've used a lot without defining it for you, but your gender identity is your own internal understanding of your gender. It doesn't have anything to do with your physical expression. It's your internal understanding. It's a deeply held belief in regards to your gender. And sexual orientation is separate from gender identity. My gender identity is female. My sexual orientation is lesbian. I am a woman who is attracted to other women. So those two, I think, sometimes are important to tease out. Now, also, even if I'm doing an in-depth dive with some organizations, I will still just stop there. Because you all work with youth, it's also important to know that here are all of the other, in just a handful, just a smattering of the identities that youth today are using to identify themselves. So if you don't know what something means, it's okay to ask. There are so many out there that all the youth can't keep track of them. It's okay to ask questions, especially in regards to some of this. It's also, I think, important to remember that hold on, let me get to my slide here about this. So the rainbow flag as a pride symbol originated in 1978, but really didn't become a symbol. I mean, it was created, didn't become a symbol for the LGBTQ community until 1994. The lesbian flag, where's my lesbian flag up here? I don't even see it. It's orange and pink. Oh, it's down way at the bottom. That wasn't created until 1999. A lot of these flags are new. A lot of them are being created every day. They're identifiers for folks. So it's okay not to know what all the flags mean. And it's okay to ask some questions because there's a lot of them floating around out there right now. All right. Language evolution and mirroring. This is my favorite picture I've ever found because I feel like it really perfectly illustrates what I like to talk about on this slide, which is, first of all, the evolution of language and how quickly it's happened. So we talked about lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer as sort of the 5 terms within the acronym. But I can tell you that in my work with our older adults, queer is not a word I'm ever going to use to identify anybody within that group, because for so many of them, that was used as a slur for a long time. I can tell you that words like dyke are words that some people have really chosen to embrace and take back, and others have said, no, that feels dirty to me. My wife would rather identify as a dyke than she would as a lesbian. For me, I identified as gay for a long time because lesbian was used as a slur against me when I was younger, and it felt dirty. I've only recently started to say, no, this is a word that I'm going to take back for myself. So that really just brings us to sort of the second part of this, which is mirroring. And that's when you're working with anyone who's part of the LGBTQ community, youth or otherwise, mirror the language that they use to identify themselves. Let them lead that conversation and then mirror that language back to them. And then the evolution part is also just really recognizing that our language has shifted so quickly as LGBTQ rights have sort of launched into this like hyperdrive in the last 20 years. And so that hyperdrive of progress has come with this like jerky moment in our history when we're really wrestling with our words and what they mean. These are growing pains. It's a symbol of progress, but it means that we have clunky things that people struggle with, like they, them as pronouns, right? Some people are like, this is plural. I don't like it. Maybe, but some people tried like they, them, these are, and it was almost harder to adopt a whole new word. And so where we've kind of landed is with they, them. Our language is at this sort of sticky point where it's evolving. And so that brings me to this picture of sand. I had someone tell me once that raising a teenager was like cupping sand in your hands, and that if you try to hold it too tight, it's all going to slip through your fingers. And so you really have to cup it gently and allow it room to kind of move back and forth. And that's where language is right now in regards to the LGBTQ community. As soon as we try to latch too tightly onto any of these terms, we just lose the definition entirely. It really is at this point of growth that means we have to hold it gently. I understand that that might also be something difficult for a room full of librarians. I know my wife is a writer and really has struggled with it. But it's helpful for me to think of it as this place we're at in history of progress. And it means that we're in this sort of in-between area. So mirroring people's language back at them is really one of the safest ways to ensure that you are honoring their authentic selves as they've chosen to represent them to you. All right, this is the part I told you about with numbers. We're gonna get into some numbers. They're kind of main specific, but I think they can be sort of reflected out to your communities as well. How many LGBTQ people are there? Tough question, because for so long, this is a question that we haven't asked. And we haven't asked it because prior to, 30, 40 years ago, when we asked this question, it's because we were illegally publishing, not illegally, we were publishing these names, outing people, they were losing their livelihoods. So we, for a long time, erred on not asking about LGBTQ identity. We're now at a point in our history where we're saying, hey, this is now not data that's being used against people, and we need it to better serve this underserved community. So you might see this question popping up more in different areas of your life, like at the doctor's office, but I would bet that it's not a common one. I can say this says recent household survey, I think it was actually closer to like 2018. 8% of respondents identified themselves as LGBTQ+. When we're looking at youth, and you'll see this is broken out into LGB because those are sexual orientations, which is a little bit different from the T. Our most recent survey here in the state of Maine found that 16% of high school students identified as, I'm sorry, this says LGBT, it shouldn't, as lesbian, gay, or bisexual, which is about 9,000 students here in our state. And we're a state of 1.3 million. As far as transgender youth, we had 3.6 of our high school students identify as transgender. So that's about 2,000, again, out of we're a population of 1.3. So our population is kind of similar to like New Hampshire, even Delaware, Rhode Island, you're a little bit less than us. Obviously, New York, New Jersey, so you're going to have to multiply this number. You've got more folks kicking around out there than we do here in Maine. But those are our recent numbers. People like to look at this increase and say, it's just so much cooler to be gay now, and so everyone's gay. Like, kind of, maybe. I like to compare this to being left-handed. So 100 years ago, only 3% of the population was left-handed. And now over 11% is. And I don't think that it's because it's cooler to be left-handed. I think it's because you're not punished for it, right? You're not told you're going to hell. You're not stigmatized. So take that as what you will. I would argue that our number up here of 8% is actually undercounted. I think we probably have a greater number of people there who are still not comfortable coming out in government surveys such as this, and that our youth are much more comfortable. And that's, again, a sign of progress. For my little guy. Boop, boop. All right. So are the kids all right? Here's our latest data from our Youth Integrated Health Survey. I put this in because you are the folks who are going to see these kids in your libraries. They are significantly more likely to say that violence in their home has made them consider leaving. In addition to that, another statistic that I don't have in here, and I apologize, it was an oversight, but 1.5% of heterosexual youth who answered this survey said that they've experienced housing insecurity in the last 30 days. So 1.5%, actually, I think it's 1.6. And over 20% of our LGBTQ youth said that they'd experienced housing insecurity in the last 30 days. So again, when you're looking at the populations that I think are most likely to really be spending time in libraries, that's where you're going to see that. Yeah, these students are twice as likely to feel unsafe at school. They are significantly more likely to have been bullied in the last 12 months. And significantly less likely to have support from adults. Again, this is an area that I think really matters to you as folks working with these kids, especially the one that kills me every time I look at this is this one at the bottom. I feel I matter to my community. 60% of non-LGBT youth do. Only 37% of LGBT youth feel that they matter to their community. These numbers aren't startling, but they are consistently heartbreaking. So let's look, this is sort of a step back for a minute. We're stepping back from youth. This is a map from an organization called the Movement Advancement Project. It's a great website if you have some time and you really like visuals like I do. This map in particular illustrates LGBTQ policy tallies by state. So states that are green have great protections for LGBTQ people in general. Not just youth, just in general. Maine, for example, great state to be. Vermont, New York, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, right? All up in here, we're doing okay. As we move further down, obviously it's where the policy scores start to decrease. And these are specifically policies, non-discrimination policies for LGBTQ people in housing, workplace, benefits, public accommodations. Once we get into red states, those aren't states that are lacking LGBTQ non-discrimination policies. They are actually states that have negative policy tallies, which means they have laws on their books that actively permit discrimination on the basis of an LGBTQ identity. This is a map that I show always, no matter who I'm talking to, because A, not everyone who's in our states is from our states. B, within even the LGBTQ community, there was sort of this sense when marriage equality was won that we were done. And that's not the case. And C, as we all know, social media and the news means that we have a pretty darn good idea what's happening in other states, and especially the states who are making some of the biggest, loudest moves. So even our kids up here, they're watching what's happening in the rest of the country. And we'll talk a little bit about that here in a minute. Here are some maps that are specific to youth. These are states that require LGBTQ inclusion in curricular standards. And obviously our dark orange ones are the ones that censor LGBTQ people or issues in school, such as the infamous Don't Say Gay bill down in Florida. You can really see how dark orange things are down through the South there. Oh, I had something else I wanted to tell you about this. What was it? Let's see my map. Oh, not yet. Oh, yeah, that's what I wanted to say. So a lot of the legislation involving curriculum, and also this next slide that I'm going to show you here, this map in particular is surrounding the transgender students in sports that has been happening. Who hasn't heard about it at this point, right? But both this map and the previous map are reflecting legislation that has largely happened over the last like 2 to 4 years. So it's not so much that these are long-standing things that have been sitting there forever and ever, and we're not paying attention to it. These are debates and policies that have been enacted, in some case, on a very public stage over the last few years. I think back personally, so I try to put in perspective like 13, 14-year-olds and how much they're paying attention to news and media. And I remember specifically, I was 11 when Matthew Shepard was murdered. That was 45 minutes from my house. And even at that point, though I wasn't even sure what my identity was or was even really thinking about it that hard, I paid attention. And I paid attention to the way the country responded to that. And I paid attention to the way the news talked about it. So all that to say, they're paying attention. That slide got messed up because I tried to do something fancy with timing and then I forgot about it. But the kids are paying attention. They're watching the news. They're watching the media. And more importantly, they're also watching us to see how we respond and to see who has their back. So I just like to put that plug out there. If anybody is involved in any way on sort of the legislation advocacy side of it, they are paying attention. Okay, that ends it for numbers. So now let's get into the fun part about it. This is my section that I'm calling best practices. Everybody always wants to know, like, okay, so it's rough. Okay, so they're having a hard time. So what specifically can we do? Some of that's hard because it's like, how do you be a more inclusive person? How do you become a safe person for some of these youth? Here are some, going backwards, best practices that I can give you for what it counts. Pronouns. Typically, I would ask all of us to separate out into breakout rooms and introduce ourselves with our pronouns to see how that feels. But pronouns are something that are being used more and more as a form of introduction, along with a name. You can think of pronouns as a name. I want to be able to introduce myself to you, tell you my name, and have you use that name. I don't want to introduce myself and have you look at me and choose what name you think is appropriate. I want to tell you who I am, and I want you to respect that. Pronouns are basically the same thing. People want to tell you their pronouns and not have them decided for them. So how do we do that? One way is leading with your own pronouns. I sort of view this as a way that I can use my privilege as a cisgendered woman to create space for people with a different lived experience. If I step forward, I introduce myself, my name is Nemnite, my pronouns are she, her, hers. I've made it normal that we're sharing that. So now I'm not asking somebody else who might feel like an outlier in the situation to have to step forward and be that one voice. We've just made it standard that all of us are going to share our pronouns and we're not going to make assumptions about other people. That's why pronouns are so important. And it's why right now, especially with youth, especially with, I'm sure you're seeing this, but we're seeing this with our teenager. There are so many explorations of gender happening right now, just all over the place, which, like, great, explore away. But leading with your pronouns shows that you're going to be respectful of them when they tell you who they are. That's an easy one. That's like such an easy lift, right? It's such an easy way to include people, to sort of recognize that, like, maybe you can't always understand another person's experience or reasons, but you can respect it. And I think that that's sort of where I sit with pronouns, is it's like, if that's all it takes to make somebody feel more included, absolutely. That's so easy. This is where we do a breakout. We're not going to. Sorry. Mirroring. We talked about this before, but it's so important to mirror the language back to somebody that they use for themselves. Again, then we're just not making assumptions about who they are, without really knowing who they are or where they are. This is, again, especially important as we look at working with youth. At our summer camp, we have the kids put on a name tag every single day. And that's because some days they're going to feel they're in a safe enough space to try out different pronouns on that day. And that's okay. What is important, I talked to a really good friend of mine about this, especially because, like I said, my 15-year-old is non-binary, and we've had a lot of conversations with them about what that means to them. And so I was talking to my friend about youth trying on all these different identities, and he said, yeah, it's almost like we need to ask people to accept them for who they tell you they are in this moment, believe them when they tell you who they are right now, and also allow them room to grow. And that, at least for me and my teenager, has been some of the most helpful advice I've ever had is I need to believe you when you tell me who you are right now. I need to leave you room to grow. And I think that that really applies for all youth right now who are just kind of being bombarded with information and trying to figure out where they fit. Believe them when they tell you who they are right now, and also be a safe space for them to change that if they need to. Bathrooms. Oh, the bathroom debate. Oh, the bathrooms. Again, I can say for my kid, bathrooms are the stickiest, hardest issue, especially at school. They have one non-gendered bathroom and it has a key. So when students who identify as non-binary, maybe who are recently out as trans but not comfortable in the bathroom, regardless, they have to go to the office and get a key to go use the single genderless bathroom. If you can provide genderless bathrooms in any way in your library, or make them more easily accessible, that's another just really huge area that helps kids not feel like this one. My teenagers stopped going to the bathroom in their school entirely. They would, and they told me, they were like, I don't drink water at school because then I'll have to pee. I was like, this feels unhealthy. Like, surely we can find another solution to this. But it's the inconvenience. First of all, I don't think teenagers want to be inconvenienced. I know mine doesn't. But it's also that extra step to have to take to do just a basic daily function, that makes it so uncomfortable. If you have a way to create any sort of genderless bathrooms or increase the youth's accessibility to those genderless bathrooms, that's a huge step. Do's and don'ts when somebody comes out to you. This is like a little prescriptive. I don't love this slide. But there's a couple important things to go through here. If somebody comes out to you, one of the easiest ways to respond to that, I think, is thank you, right? Thank you for trusting me with that information. Thank you for telling me that. You can ask supportive questions, especially in your position. Have you told anyone else? How did that go? Asking supportive questions is a great rule of thumb in any situation. Respect their confidentiality. This is a tricky one. This is a tricky subject. I don't know what the governing rules of libraries are. I know we're part of different school conversations right now over how we encourage teens to talk to their parents and how we respect teens' confidentiality if it feels unsafe. As much as possible, respect confidentiality if somebody comes out to you. I mostly keep the slide on here because this is my favorite part of it right here. Things not to say. And when I do this presentation in high school, it's also the moment I get the most participation because I ask high schoolers and middle schoolers, if it's for middle schoolers, to list off things not to say when somebody comes out to you. And this one is almost always on their list of things to say. Oops, I knew it. All the high schoolers are like, that's supportive. Why wouldn't I say that? When we say something like, I knew it, or I'm not surprised, what we're trying to say is like, I love you. This doesn't change anything for me. You're still the same person. But when we phrase it like this, what we're saying to that person is, I've been making judgments about you. I've been predetermining things about you behind your back. I've maybe been talking to other people about you. One of the greatest fears for many people that I talk to about coming out is the fear that people will think about them differently. So something else to really remember that so many LGBTQ people are worried about is that when they come out to you, they're still the same person. You just know more about them. I knew it. Check it off your list. It's well intentioned. It doesn't accomplish what you think it's accomplishing. Are you sure? Okay, let's not say that. We know that. But this last one, assume they need help. Offer support. Yes, offer support. Don't assume that just because they've come out that they need help. That's sort of a big little gray area to walk there. Offer support. Don't assume that this means that they need help. Maybe they're just telling you to keep you in the loop, and that's okay. All right, we are doing great. We're even going to have time, I think, for some conversation, which is great. Boop. My animations, they're all over the place. Oh, this slide. All right, some books. Some books, bunch of librarians. I'm sure you recognize all of these titles, all of these authors. You've probably read many of these. What do these books have in common? Just take a second, look at the screen, because I want to show you this slide. I want you to tell me, well, not tell me because we have too many people to do that. So when I look at these two slides, that first one, those are books for girls. And the second one, these are books for everybody. The only difference is the gender of the protagonist. There is something in our society where we assume that girls can read books and are interested in reading books about people of any gender, and that boys are only interested in reading books about boys. We like to think that this isn't true, but I would challenge you to consider whether or not that has been ever a consideration in recommending a book to kids. I think that our thought process tends to go along the lines of, this is about a girl, but I think you'll like it. Or this is about princesses, let's find something else. I think that there is something in our society, and actually, one of our books on the previous page, The Princess, what is it called? Oops, Shannon. Where is she? Oh, it's gonna make me go through all of them. Oh, for the love. Shannon Hale wrote, the author of Princess Academy, wrote an incredible article for the Washington Post, and I would really recommend giving it a read because she talks about her experiences going to schools to read excerpts from the Princess Academy. I think it's called the Princess Academy. Someone's going to correct me if I'm wrong. And how even in many of her assemblies, only girls were invited. The message that we send to kids when we tell them that only boys' stories are worth the audience of everybody, and that girls' stories are only worth the audience of other girls, that's a really damaging narrative. And it's something that I just want to put out there, that so that all of these incredibly 106 very well-intentioned folks doing really good work with LGBTQ youth in libraries can just keep in mind when you're making book recommendations. Here at Equality Maine, we're working on a campaign this next year called We Play Too, which is increasing visibility for athletes, LGBTQ athletes. And not surprisingly, there are many female identified athletes who are out. There are very few male identified athletes who are out. And I think some of it even comes back to the books that we give kids to read and the shame that we put on boys for reading things about girls. Something to consider, especially for this community. And also check out Shannon Hale's article in the Washington Post. It's really, really worth a read. Oh yeah, The Giver. I mean, also even these books, I was required to read some of these books in school. The ultimate takeaway that I'd like you to have in regards to best practices is that if you have youth in your library talking to you about gender, those conversations should be about supporting and loving a person as they are right now. Just like I talked about my conversation with my friend Arande about how do we accept and love kids for who they tell us they are right now and believe them when they tell us who they are and still hold them gently enough that they have room to grow. It's tricky. Our youth right now are in a wild spot. Whatever. I don't think I need to lecture you on that. I think you know how crazy this sort of new generation with this broad access to the internet and these just multitude of layers and identities and labels that they're all trying to just like stick on themselves at all times in this hope that like something will fit, something will explain, something will let them fit in. And they're trying a lot of things on, and that's okay. Let them try it on. I love that they have access in this way to really slip into these different identities and figure out where they fit right now. But we need to be sure that we're giving them the space to do that safely in a loving and supportive environment. I would love, we actually do have 15 minutes. So if it's okay, Kara, can we send people into breakout rooms just to talk about this one thing for the next 10 minutes? Breakout rooms of like 4. Can we do that?
I think so. Give me 1 minute.
Okay. Oops, I didn't mean to switch away from that. Sorry. I didn't ask Kara to do this beforehand. Oh, we're going to lose people because they have to talk. I'm sorry. I hate breakout rooms too.
Okay, I got 4 rooms set.
4 rooms? Oh,
yep.
That's probably too many.
2.
That's probably too many.
How many do you want?
That would be 20 people in a room. Can we do like 3 or 4 people in a room?
Oh, goodness. Oh, okay. Yep.
Is that possible? I'm sorry. I didn't ask you to do this ahead of time.
Yeah, some folks can't talk. That's fine. No one's going to.
That's okay. You. No one's gonna. No, and I get that. Like you come to a webinar because you don't plan on talking. I totally hear that.
All right, I've got it. So 5 to 6 people per room.
Okay, cool. If you all can introduce yourself with your name and pronouns, and if you want, identify one area that you unintentionally apply gendered norms or assumptions. I can tell you personally, mine is in the clothing I dress my toddler in. 100%, I gender that kid, and it's hard for me to break out of it. I think that kids' clothing is so gendered. I have a really hard time being like, he's only ever going to wear khakis and button downs because that's all I've ever dressed him in. So it doesn't have to apply to libraries, but I think that this is kind of a rich conversation topic for us to just think about the way we approach gender. All right, 10 minutes, that's it, only 10 minutes. You could do 10 minutes. I'll see you back in 10 minutes. Welcome back, my folks who braved the breakout room that I promised you wasn't going to happen. I'm sorry for throwing that at you last minute. I hope you were able to have some good conversations with the folks who did stick around. There were a couple of questions in the chat that I wanted to talk about. Someone asked what to do about youth who don't respect pronouns. I don't have good tips for that other than sitting and having honest and direct conversations about respect with them. It's the same thing we do with older adults who don't respect pronouns in a room, is actually sit down and have a one-on-one conversation. But I don't have any like tips or tricks or fast fixes. I'm really sorry. It's just open dialogue and communication about it and about how their actions impact other people. Somebody else also said, don't use fantastical bathroom gender neutral signs. I totally agree. I didn't really like any of the gender neutral bathroom signs I was finding, and that one made me laugh. I'm not advocating for putting up signs for mermaids and whatever in your library. Use some gender neutral bathroom signs. I just tossed that on a slide. I do want to really fast, I just will put up my boop, 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 boop. Click through all this. My contact info. If anybody has questions or complaints or insults or just wants to talk, this is my email address. It's also my phone number. I'm a lot easier to get a hold of if you text me. So if for some reason you librarians in all of New England have something urgent and need me in Maine, you can text me. But otherwise, my email address is also up there, and I would be happy to hear from any of you if you have any thoughts or things that you think should be added in the future. I'm happy for that too. We are always kind of evolving this training, and this one is specifically the first time we've done one for this group. So I'm also happy to hear your insights or thoughts for next time. Otherwise, that's it for me. Thank you so much for being here, and especially for staying with us after lunch. And I hope you have a great rest of your conference.
Thank you so much, Nem, and everyone who stayed with us. We've got a 15-minute break now. And so the next session in this room will be the second Discord session, using Discord to build a community for teens at your library. And the other win will be Youth Summer Career Bridging Workshop. So we'll see you in 15 minutes.